what your all's homework assignment for the end of the week is. Because as you guys know, each week I'm having you guys do part of your paper so that it doesn't all just kind of coalesce at the end. Which, a quick reminder there, you have 4 weeks still to do. 4 weeks. It is and it isn't. The reason I'm like saying you guys need to get on this is, as you guys are probably fully aware, you're probably going to have other stuff to do. I maybe not. I mean, maybe this is the year the sophomores are treated daintily and no work is ever given to them, and all they do is sit home and eat Cheetos. But I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. I think you guys are going to have stuff to do. And so I don't want you to be overwhelmed, because if you wait till the last week and you got everything else to do, you're going to hate your life. And we don't want that. We don't want you to hate your life. We want you to enjoy it and be happy and successful. So this week, as you guys know, last week your sources were due. 2, 3, some in the neighborhood. This week, I want your 3 main topics. What I mean by that, you have a thesis. Your subject, whatever it is important in history because, whatever. What is that because? What are those 3 reasons? So find 3 reasons that your person or thing is important and write those down. Easy peasy. Because that's going to be supporting your thesis. You understand what I'm saying?
You have to have that in a paragraph form.
No. Not in this case. Because that'll be next week. It'll be your first paragraph, which is your opening paragraph, and so on and so forth. So, yeah. The way we're going to write it is opening paragraph, closing paragraph, and then worry about the body. Because the idea is the body is just fulfilling the opening and closing. Now, you can always rewrite parts of that. That's kind of the process. You're writing a rough draft, but this will give you an idea of where you're going. So it makes sense. But if you guys have any just direct questions about that, feel free to ask me. But essentially, it's like if I was trying to prove why the Revolutionary War was an important conflict, why it was important to the world, I'd say number one, it created the United States of America. I mean, come on. It was the birth of the country that's still around as a major player in the world. Number 2, it changed the relationship between Britain and France. For one thing, France, partially because of this, undergoes the French Revolution, and also is going to contribute to the growing animosity between these 2 powers. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how the Revolutionary War affected Canada and the United States as their relationships. It's eventually going to come to a head in the War of 1812. It sets the political scheme that everything else is going to happen. So that's just my rough guess. Those are my 3 main topics, and I'm going to spend the body explaining that. Does that make sense? I gave 3 different things and kind of looking at. So look at your sources, see maybe in your sources says this is why this is an important event, or why this person was important. That's a good place to start. Okay? Any questions on that? Cool. All right. The French Revolution, phase 3 and 4. I'm going to give you a warning right now. The writing is itty-bitty. That's not because there's a whole lot of it. It's just because, well, you'll see. It's just kind of a lot of bullets. Let's start, though, with terms you need to know. First, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte. He's kind of the subject of today. Coup d'etat, plebiscite, Lycée, Concordat, Napoleonic Code, the Battle of Trafalgar. If you need to see these in a little bit more solid print, these are in your textbook at the top of terms and things. Key ideas, I think what it's called. And give you a basis for what we're talking about today. Now, I'm sorry about what happened. Oh, yes.
Do you know when our tests are going to be online? Like the corrections and everything?
Oh, when I had everything in, probably by the end of the week. Right now, I think there's only 1 assignment on there, so that's literally the only thing your grade is made up of right this minute. But I'll be adding some things here as the week goes on. First order of business is to get you guys ready for the test, which is Friday, which I presume you were aware of that. If not, there's a test on Friday. It's on Chapter 7. And, yeah, that's fun. And the other thing is, guys, we only have, after this week, 1, 2, 3 weeks till Thanksgiving break. So it's going to go quick, I do have at least one movie I want to show you guys about the Napoleonic Wars. And that we'll do after the test because, so I was talking to you guys, I think it was 7th period or 6th period, and they mentioned like, we really appreciate the movies and all that, helps us put things in perspective, but it kind of also distracts from the actual like content. So that's fair. We'll do the material section first and kind of extrapolate on later. And then otherwise, we'll start into the Industrial Revolution, kind of keep moving, and have a lot of stuff we can look at. It's pretty exciting. So anyways, that's this week in a nutshell. But I'll have the essays for you online by the end of the week on the day, and then you guys can start preparing for that. So that's fun. So let's continue on with these. Anyone need these terms? Or are you good on these? That's okay. Cool. All right. So like I said, itty bitty writing. And there you go. So like I said, I tried to eliminate some of the extraneous writing, things like that, but we'll talk about it as we go along. So first off, the directory is otherwise known as the third phase of the French Revolution. That's literally all we're talking about. You see what happens? Before we get there, what was France like at the end of the second phase? What was the second phase of the French Revolution like? It was the Reign of Terror. Good. So what was it like for people in the Reign of Terror? Right. Why? There's true lot of violence. Yeah. First off, you've got the executions by guillotine. The government pretty much made everything punishable by guillotine. You had to be part of the war effort or guillotine. Add into that a lot of frustrations with losing the wars meant massive amounts of violence, such as the September massacres. And the fact that there was just uncertainty. People, we take the life we live sometimes for granted. The fact that you don't really have to worry about revolution. You don't have to worry about mass violence in the streets. I mean, if you think about it, we spend an awful lot of time in the media talking about things that are happening, like school shootings and car wrecks and all kinds of stuff that happens that's bad. But really, when you get down to it, this is the safest time in history to be alive. I mean, in the United States. I mean, fewer people die to violent crime, fewer people are involved in accidents. I mean, it's really quite a great time to be alive. It's almost like we're trying hard to find something to be scared of. It's almost like we're trying too hard to find things to be worried about. This was a time in the French Revolution where, you really had no idea what to expect. It was just complete uncertainty, and that's terrifying. Especially if, you have a family trying to keep people safe and alive and healthy. It's really hard, and it's the stress that would apply. I mean, it's literally the reign of fear. So things are not so good. The third phase is going to try to alleviate these problems, but it's going to ultimately fail to do so. The main reason is because the government, which was known as the Directory, was ineffective. Why was it ineffective? There's a lot of places we can go with that. But let's start with the first point. The executive branch was 5 people. That was the Directory, the 5-man Directory. And ultimately right there, we've got a problem. How easy do you think it would be to get 5 people to agree on anything? What's that? Well, let's talk about this. Let's take the top Democrat, the top Republican, and then whatever 3 other political parties in the U.S. of your choice, and you have to agree. It'd be like impossible, right? It just would not work. I mean, ostensibly, it's a good policy because then you have representation for everybody, right? But the thing is, the more opinions you bring into the situation, the more difficult it makes it to rule, to do stuff, especially in a crisis. So, basically, the government was unable to deal with the problems it faced. And so, ultimately, that's going to set the stage for a military coup d'etat, which is where the military takes over the government. You see, the thing of it is, despite all this ineffective rulership, the army is still doing pretty well. And the thing is, hearing about successes in wars is one of the only things that makes people feel confident. If the army can, win a battle, that means that there's hope. There's hope for us, hope for France at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. There's the possibility that things are going to, come to an end and that things are going to get better. So if you are a military general and you're winning in battles, you become like a superstar. People are all about it. And that, of course, brings us to our friend Napoleon Bonaparte, the soon-to-be Emperor of France. Quick bit of his biography. He was actually from Corsica, which is an island that's Italian but was controlled by the French. So what's going to happen is already he's kind of a foreigner, not really, but also kind of. He's not from Paris, so he's sort of an outsider, and that kind of makes people willing to kind of underestimate him, which is going to help in his ascension to power. He was a noble, but he was a pretty poor one. He didn't have enough money. He wasn't going to inherit to really just be noble and not work. So he had to find some career. And the military offered a lot of opportunities for being a high-ranking member of society. And it turns out when he was in the military academy, he wasn't a very good soldier, but he was an excellent artilleryman. In fact, that's really his strong suit, is artillery, using cannons on the battlefield. And basically, for the last part of the 19th or 18th century, he is going to have many successful military campaigns. What's kind of interesting about Napoleon, even when he loses, he still finds a way to win. Because one of the things he understands is the use of propaganda, which, again, to clarify, what is propaganda?
It's like what the media tries to make you do.
Yeah, that's a succinct explanation, yeah. So he tries to make it seem that his failures aren't really that bad, but his successes are great. And adding to this fact that he's frankly a genius. He's a military genius. We'll get into that here in just a second. So what happens is his successes in wars makes him really, really popular with the common person. And he uses that to his advantage. Some high-ranking individuals in the government try to convince him that he's the guy for the job. He needs to be the leader. Now, admittedly, those people had ulterior motives. They wanted to see themselves in power and using him as sort of a puppet leader. But Napoleon understood that and was able to kind of outmaneuver them politically. So what happens is in 1799, Napoleon basically takes over the government using his military and dissolves the directory. He instead establishes a triumvirate. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, triumvirate is a rule by how many people? Good. Do you guys know which ancient empire first had the triumvirates? It was the ancient Romans. Now, why do you think Napoleon would be setting up a government based on Rome? Think about art for a second. What was really popular at the time? Remember, we talked about three different artistic branches at the time. Classical. Good. Now, this is what's based on Rome. Why Rome? Why are we fixating on Rome? Because things are so bad, right? People want to feel important. People want to feel secure. By saying we're like Rome, we're using this imagery of Rome, basically the most important Europe has ever been, the greatest it's ever been, the best civilization, the most successful. By kind of likening ourselves to it, it makes people feel important. And when they feel important, they feel good about themselves. He's directly combating the negative attitudes that have been kind of circulated since the beginning of the French Revolution. So by saying we're triumvirate, we are Rome, he's playing on people's insecurities. And that's important because if you can do that, people listen to you, There's a reason why when it comes time to doing political advertisements, political commercials, all that, what do they always focus on? The negative, right? So we're setting ourselves up. and he kind of elects himself as first consul, the head of the triumvirate. Eventually, he just gets rid of the triumvirate entirely and declares himself emperor. Now, why is it so braggy? Because if he just flat out took over and said, I'm the new emperor, people would freak out. Remember, they just got done with the king. If he comes and says, I am king, they're probably going to guillotine him, right? So by saying that I'm, one of, three guys, the average comment on the street says, well, we went from 5 to 3. Yeah, that makes sense. Cut out 2 guys, go to 3, it's all good. And then they hear about Napoleon first consul, Napoleon the leader, Napoleon all this stuff, Napoleon the emperor. Hey, we're New Rome. We need an emperor. We need our Julius Caesar. It's all good. And Napoleon's spin doctors, the guys who put out the PR he wants, the propaganda he wants, are selling this, that this is awesome, this is a good thing. And to be perfectly honest, he's just that popular. But he can't just declare himself that, because again, that's like someone taking away people's rights, and this is kind of a sticky topic. So how does he guarantee that people are going to support him 100%? The plebiscite. A plebiscite is a yes or no vote. It's a popularity contest. He puts the vote to people and says, okay, people of France, I want to set up a new government that's triumvirate. How many of you guys want to do that? Yes, triumvirate? No, not triumvirate. So he gets the majority of saying yes, he does it. He's able to guarantee people's votes by selling it through propaganda. You see what I'm saying? He used a lot of censorship. If you said something he didn't like, he censored you. Instead, had a different message spun instead. So he's a master of this propaganda. That's why he's able to do what he wants to do. And by using plebiscites, he raises up in a position of power that really you haven't had since the kings of France. So this is kind of important how he goes about that and understanding how he gets away with it. The other thing is he's just that successful. Let's talk propaganda for a second. One of the things that still survives today are the paintings of Louis David, who was this neoclassical painter who originally was kind of buddies with the members of the French Revolution, and eventually when that fell about, switched over to Napoleon and painting pictures of them in heroic and really kind of extreme, almost romantic style type stuff. Sold this image of somebody who's really strong. Now today, if you look at Louis David's works, it tends to be the later stuff, like towards the end of Napoleon's career, when he's fat and old and sort of like, falling apart. Like literally, the most famous painting of Napoleon is days before his death. That kind of fails to paint the picture of him as this hero of the Republic. This is a much better image, I feel, showing him young, vital. One hand he's got the flag, and the other he's got the sword. This almost like billowing costume, all black. It's a very striking figure. He had an image. And if you think about it today, when someone is trying to be a politician or indeed just being a celebrity, they have to have people who manage their image. People who make certain that they look the best they can, making certain that they are shown in such a way so that they're put in a good light. This is kind of the guy who wrote the book on this, Here's another example of David's painting. Again, in a Roman style, the equestrian, it's classic, dude on a horse, leading armies. And I like what's going on in the body language. First of all, this is a very, energetic painting. The horse is rearing, he's holding on, he's got his hand like a claw. It's an almost aggressive standpoint. You've got the army marching over the freaking Alps, which are kind of big old mountains in the northern part of Italy. And this is where he's attacking northern Italy, right? So it's a surprise attack, and there's some other people who have done that, 3 specifically in history, that are really, really important. Number 1, Hannibal, the guy who led the elephants over the Alps to attack Rome. Carthage, the great Punic Wars. He's, again, tying back to Rome. Number 2 is Charlemagne, the guy who founds the Holy Roman Empire. Napoleon's going to be the guy who lays that low and ends it, the pretenders to the Roman throne. We're the real Rome. And then Bonaparte's name on top of them all. It's, we're awesome, we're France, we're doing all these things and better. This is the kind of symbolism they're using in order to sell this image of a grand empire. And I'll tell you, Napoleon knows how to put forth a good image. He likes to dress up, let's put it that way. He knew how to handle the fashion statement. He went a little overboard sometimes as well, you might say. For instance, his palace guard, they got a new uniform almost like every 6 months. And these were not like, like drab, olive military uniforms. I'm talking like some pretty crazy nonsense. For instance, one of the uniforms the palace guard had was embroidered buckskin pants, which, think like Davy Crockett, but it's embroidered, so it's got all this, like, if you go back to the first photo, you see all this gold embroidery on his jacket. It's all this kind of stuff, so it's really busy and expensive. And then they had, like, blood red waistcoats, these coats, or these waistcoats. And then they had 2 coats on, which were inverse colors, that were the hussar coats. The hussar coats had like tons and tons of buttons and chains across, and they were just like these really blingy outfits. And then on top of that, they had capes that, and I'm not making this up, crushed purple velvet and leopard skin. And then on top of that, they had a helmet that was this crusted helmet with gloss gold leaf leather and these like ostrich plume feathers coming off the back all the way to the center of their back. Just like this, oh my God. And that was their uniform for like 6 months. Then they sold that and did an even more crazy uniform. And by the way, something interesting about that uniform, you guys know what military surplus is? The military has too much stuff, they sell it off to the public. Yeah, they did that. And they sold it to the United States of America, specifically a Lancers unit in Rhode Island, which became their military uniform. So you could argue that was the U.S. military uniform for a short period of time. Shiny! So, he knew how to present himself. He was ostentatious as all get out. So as you could say, Napoleon was a pretty popular dude. He did a lot of things that people were really happy with. Number 1, the military victories. Anytime you succeed in war, you come off as popular. Number 2, he promoted economic growth. The thing you need most for economic stability is confidence. People were confident in Napoleon's ability to rule, and so they were investing in France again. He also ended up setting up the continental system, which ultimately benefited France. Third, he promoted the return of the emigres. These are folks who fled the French Revolution. He's welcoming them back. Come on back into France. Nothing bad is happening anymore. The fact he's able to smooth this over, the fact he's able to do this, is pretty telling of his abilities. Add into that fact that the church, which there's all that problem with secularism during the French Revolution, he's able to kind of walk a fair compromise. He says that, we're not going to completely get rid of the Church of France. We're not going to get rid of the Catholic Church. It was formational in the culture of France, but it has no more power than government. So he's kind of walking the middle ground there. But probably his greatest contribution in this regard is the Napoleonic Code, which was a system of laws that he set up, because French law was a mess. No one had actually dealt with it for centuries. Kings kept adding to it and dabbling with it here and there, but no one actually set out making it simplified. That's what the Napoleonic Code does. And it's so successful that it is the most widely adopted code of law in Europe. More codes of law are based on the Napoleonic Code than any other. And this is countries that hated Napoleon. They hated him, got rid of everything French that came into their country, but they kept back. It was just that much better. Now, some other things to consider. Napoleon's image. Today, he has somewhat of a mixed legacy. In many countries in Europe, he's remembered as a villain. In some cases, almost as much to the level as Adolf Hitler. If you ask someone in England about Napoleon, they're going to be really negative about it. Ask someone in France, however, and they're going to talk about, he was pretty great for a lot of different reasons. When he made France the central power of Europe. He did a lot of beneficial things. He did some bad things, for sure. I mean, let's not mince words. He was a conqueror. He went and took over countries. He forever changed how they ran, how they moved. He completely disassembled the whole Roman Empire. I mean, he does a lot of things that are amazing, but he also does some things that are pretty good as well. Probably the most famous thing he's remembered for is being short. Let's talk about that for a second. How tall was Napoleon? He was about 5'6", which today is pretty short, actually. But at the time, that was of average height. You know, he was an average height guy. Why people remember him as being short has to do with English propaganda. You see, whenever it was described how tall he was, they were using a different article of measurement, specifically the French measurement. And French feet are longer than English feet. So, if memory serves, yeah, that's how it works. So, like, whenever we're saying he's 5'6", that's according to English. If you go French, he's like 5 foot something, 4 foot something, whatever. And so they ran with this saying, look at the short little emperor of France. They were making fun of him to try to downplay his achievements and to basically use that as a means to make people not afraid of him. Because before that, people were afraid of Napoleon. He was a ferocious warrior. He was a bloodthirsty conqueror. You know, all these really terrible things. It's the person you fear. If you make him that little tiny guy, you know, who's behind a podium with a giant hat, you can laugh at that, right? You can stand up and fight against that. So that was propaganda the British used during the Napoleonic Wars. But ultimately, it's not true. Now, between 1804 and 1814, the Napoleonic Wars, a series of wars where Napoleon conquers basically most of Europe, is going to wage. Now, here's the thing is, as I said, he was good at making even his losses into victories. There are many instances of him engaging in wars with people where he can't actually win. But he ends up suing for peace along the lines of, well, we can beat you, but, you know, it's really not worth the investment in troops to us, so why don't we make a deal? We won't conquer you. In exchange, you become part of our greater empire. You know, you basically become not really a vassal, but sort of a partner, a lesser partner in this European continent. This is, again, one of the kind of mixed legacies things. The Grand Empire was almost like the idea behind the European Union. It's like a trade group, it's a trade organization, not necessarily one empire as a whole, but kind of. So he ends up annexing several territories, makes alliances with those he can't actually conquer, and those places he does conquer, he completely removes the aristocracy, gets rid of the kings on the throne, and instead establishes new monarchies, where he puts his friends and family members on the throne. You're friends with Napoleon, you can end up, you know, king of Spain. In fact, it's his brother, Joseph, who becomes king of Spain. And this is, of course, devastating to countries that relied upon a royal succession to determine who was going to be the head of the state. He just does away with that. And so even after Napoleon's defeated, there's going to be a lot of mess disentangling all these monarchs, because some of them are killed, and some of them aren't quite sure who's supposed to be the next king of Spain or wherever. So things are going to be kind of messy after him. Another reason why people tend to not remember him very fondly. And so, in the end, there's really two powers that remain independent from the continental system, which we'll talk a bit more tomorrow. England and Russia. Now, here's the thing about those two powers. Napoleon's army is one of the strongest in Europe. And let's be honest, Napoleon wants to conquer Russia. But Russia has a gigantic army. It outnumbers his by a large margin, but they are technologically weaker. So if he can end up fighting Russia in a dead fight, he can probably win, but he also has to be concerned with what his allies will think. He has to have a reason to go to war. Otherwise, that might encourage other people to fight against him. So what he ends up doing is waiting for a reason to engage Russia in war, and it's going to be kind of a problem. But he already sets up plans, he sets up storehouses, ahead of time in different countries so that his army can be resupplied on a run. It'll be a quick fight is what he plans on. However, England is a bigger problem because England is an island, and England's navy is the top in the world. You know, France Navy, they have a strong navy, don't get me wrong, I don't want to short sell them, but they're not the English Navy. And so in order for him to really take on England, he has to defeat the English Navy, or at very least get enough troops in England that they can set up a beachhead and work from there. In order to do that, though, he does have to defeat the English Navy. And so he's going to plan and prepare, and eventually these two powers are going to meet in 1804 at Trafalgar. Trafalgar is going to be kind of the big gamut for England. If they win, then they can fend off Napoleon and they'll be fine. If they lose, it's basically the end of England, because then he'll move in his much bigger army and just take it over. So the English Navy knows this, and they appoint as its head Lord Viscount Horatio Nelson, Admiral of the Fleet. Now, Nelson is a famous figure. He's a national hero in England. Personality-wise, he was kind of soft-spoken. Well, I suppose that's not how it works. He wasn't a man of many words, from what I've read. But he was someone who believed in duty to one's country, and that was kind of his byword. He was an inspirational figure, and the fact is if anyone could do it, it was Nelson. So he ends up meeting the French fleet at Trafalgar, which is just a few miles outside the English Channel. I think that's right. I might be actually getting my geography confused. It's actually might be straight to Gibraltar now I think about it. Let me bring up the map. Yeah, that's where it is, right here. But yeah, I was getting confused with the Spanish Armada. All right, so Trafalgar. And traditionally, the way you fight in naval engagements with lots of ships is you line them up. And basically, the power of a ship, the firepower it had, was rated based upon how many guns it could bring to bear and what position it should be in the line. So you had first rate, second rate, third rate, fourth rate, fifth rate, sixth rate, etc., depending on how much firepower it had to bring on. Ships that were too small to be considered a ship of the line, they weren't even included battle plans. And the reason behind this is kind of simple. The strongest point on a ship, where you can bring most of your firepower to bear, is on the sides. That's where all your cannons are, right? The front is your second weakest position. Your rear is your weakest position. And so the idea is by putting them nose to nose, you can protect each other's weaknesses, right? So they form these big lines. Nelson says we're not going to do that. We are going to form as basically a wedge, and we're going to drive that wedge through the center of the French line, break them up and destroy them in smaller groups, which is all well and good if it works. If you fail to break their line, you're going to be destroyed. Because think about it. If they come in, and instead of breaking through that line, the French line just kind of folds in this way, they're in a crossfire and looks to be decimated. But if they break the line, they'll be in the middle of them, and they can just pick them apart at their leisure. It's going to be basically slaughtering. The idea is to take away their advantage and just smash them. So this takes a lot of bravery to actually do, because you're sailing directly at their line of fire. That's where all their firepower is. You have to be willing to basically run into the guns in order to pull this off. So people have to be incredibly brave to do this. So how do you inspire people? Well, keep in mind, communications by ship was actually really tricky, at least in terms of, you couldn't just say stuff to people. The only way to communicate over distances was by flags. And so, before the battle, Nelson orders this message sent up. which, unless you happen to have a little code book that each of the English flagship or each of the English ships carried around, you're not going to know what it's saying. By the way, the term flagship, like the flagship of the Navy, that's because that's the one that sends out flags. All right. This is what the message actually means if you translate it through the flags. England expects that every man will do his duty. Now, the reason for that, in the code book, you had this combination of flags means this combination of flags means this. So they had words for all of these, but duty was not a word in the flag book. In fact, he wanted to say something else. I forget exactly what that was. I think it was like, or England. It wasn't duty per se. It was the expects. It was England required or something like that. But he's like that. They didn't have enough flags for that, so they said, "Well, expects that works." And he was trying to soften the message, but there was no word for duty, so they had to spell it out. And using D-U-T-Y. And this message was pretty simple. Look, guys, you are the last hope for England. If we fail here, it's a straight shot to England, and we're never going to stop it. They're going to conquer England, and your way of life, as you know, is gone. No one's expecting you to win the war. You can't win the war by yourself. All England expects you to do is your duty. Man your line, fire your gun, whatever your job is, just do that. That's all you need to do. Do your duty. And that was just this patriotic message. I mean, this has gone down in budget. And not so much in the rest of the world, but in the English, UK. I mean, they celebrate Trafalgar Day. It's a national holiday, And that image I just showed you, this one back here, that is Nelson's flagship. It's still floating today, which I believe is the Victory, HMS Victory. And every Trafalgar Day, that's what they fly, that message, that simple message that meant so much and encouraged people to literally charge the guns. Now, needless to say, you guys know how this story ends. Trafalgar is a great victory for England and a colossal defeat for France. So what happens? Well, basically, Napoleon has to try to find another way to deal with England. So what they do, they try to blockade. Blockading is not letting any ships trade. Remember, England's a trade empire, so if you get rid of their trade, their economy falls apart. Ostensibly, France doesn't have to worry about that because they've got the continental system to rely upon, so we're all good. But England has a stronger navy, so they start blockading France in return, and America is trying to trade with both of them. So their ships basically have to blockade. I didn't really explain that. If you're a ship trying to trade with one of these other ships, they'll just sink you. Or board you, enslave your crew, and steal your ship. Basically piracy, right? And this was happening to American ships. Our sailors were being pressed into, serving on English ships, essentially slavery. And this really aggravated us. So we ended up declaring war on England in the War of 1812. And so England is having to fight a war with us while they're also fighting Napoleon. So this is why when you look at the English fighting the War of 1812, they didn't really do too much. It was mostly Canada and the United States. The English helped a little bit, but at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, when the War of 1812 was coming to an end, basically they realized, let's just have peace. This is dumb. And that's why the War of 1812 is kind of like, no one really remembers it because nothing really happens at the end of it, per se. But that is why it happened. It caused the War of 1812. Trafalgar did it. So that's Nelson. And what do you notice about Nelson, other than his fancy hat? He's missing a hand, yeah. It's right here. It's maybe a little bit hard for you guys to see with the back leg, but he's got his sleeve up like this. I forget. I think he lost it in Egypt. What's funny is it's not the first time he's fought against Napoleon. In Egypt, he ended up blockading the French Navy and preventing his army from being resupplied and caused him to lose the battle in Egypt. So Nelson's kind of anti-Napoleon guy. And he's again this kind of famous figure for a lot of different reasons, but I think that's kind of telling because, we talk about the effects of war, the cost of war, and one of the things is you have people being dismembered, they come back scarred. He's a national hero, and he was scarred as well. The fact that just because you lose an arm, just because you lose a leg, whatever, it doesn't mean that you can't do great things. That's kind of an important message there. Anyhow, but he dies in the battle. He loses his life, and basically this was a calamity, so to speak. He was, this great heroic figure who lays his life down in defense of freedom for England. And so, he gets a state funeral, and they end up erecting a giant statue of him in Trafalgar Square in London, which is still there, obviously. And the statue of him is on top of 4 lions flanking him, and kind of detailing the story behind Trafalgar. But one of the kind of problems with this is they're in, the Strait of Gibraltar, basically. That's kind of a long sail back to England. And can you imagine what happens to a body? You just kind of let it hang around in the heat and everything else for weeks on end. It's going to be kind of gross, isn't it? You can't have a national hero end up like that. So they have to preserve the body. How do you do that? Well, they got a barrel of brandy and dumped in it. They basically pickled him. And, carried him back home. And then they gave him a state funeral. And it was all good. But just kind of imagine, what would happen if you didn't mark that barrel? Someone tries to open it to get a drink, and they look in there just like a face staring at them. Like, It's kind of terrifying, All right, so that's pretty much it for this day. I do have a quick YouTube video I'm going to show you, although I'm not going to record that because that'd be silly.